While Makoto Mei rolls onward, just as Johanna would roll down the highways of the metaverse, we continue to open more and more figures. And today will be no different. Today we're going to scale things up to a newer figure from a company that I'm very familiar with. But I suppose this box doesn't really tell you that much, does it? If you're not familiar, this figure is from Megahouse, as could be told by the branding on this box, but this box isn't the one you want to see. That's right, my friends, it's finally time to look at Megahouse's very own line of Lucrea figures, starting of course with Makoto here. While I'm not particularly sure if the Lucrea line is specifically Persona 5 figures, I've seen several that are actually from this game. Though this one, I think, was the very first announced in the line, and so far is the only one that I own. If you aren't familiar with Megahouse, I've purchased several figures from them in the past. Both scales and posables, they've been making them for quite a while. And while some remain divided on how they feel about this company, I personally have had nothing but good experiences with their scales. If what I assume is correct, we can expect wonderful sculpting, great coloring and shading, as well as just an overall great pose and fun figure. The promotional images for this were the most exciting for me. I think that this sculpt and this design was one of the best ones I've seen so far. It's Makoto in her Phantom Thief outfit, and it is wonderfully detailed. So rather than waste my breath, let's go ahead and just crack the seal on this one and figure out if this goody two-shoes high school girl can pass the test of being an amazing figure. Now inside the box there was this little instruction card that actually shows us how to swap out some of her removable parts, because she does have options here. Surprisingly enough, there's actually 2 blisters. And okay, Megahouse, I already see you, baby. We already got a great piece to look at. This is going to be the base that Makoto will stand on. And you might understand if you've watched my other reviews that I am very excited already. They did something other than a black disc. Thank you so much. And you know, I've seen Megahouse drop the ball with the bases before. If you look at the Motoko, not Makoto, the Motoko Kusanagi figure, they just did a clear disc. This, however, is awesome. The blue tiles of what I can imagine might be the Velvet Room, or no, maybe just the blue aura from when she's summoning her persona. There's currently a film on this, so it doesn't look perfect right now, I will take that off, but we have these black chains printed on, as well as some metallic gold for Queen. This is so good. But hold the phone. I don't know if I was right about that, actually. I'm trying to peel at what I thought was a film, but as you can see, there's some scratches here, and I wasn't very happy about that. Thinking that this might have just been a protective thing I could remove, I don't see that happening. And I don't want to pick endlessly at it because then I'll just damage it more. So that is a bit disappointing, but it seems to be faint enough that I won't notice it if it's just sitting down, so we're gonna hope for the best here. Now then, the figure itself is lovely. But you may have very well noticed something that the internet noticed as well. You see, they went so hard in making this so realistic in regards to the way that they carved her body in with the sculpting that they kind of overdid it on her crotch. Some people have called this the bulge Makoto or the wiener Makoto. I've got to say, it looks worse in person than I thought it would. And that's not just because there's a good amount of light on this, it's because it's shaded to be lighter at her pelvic area, which makes no sense. Like, who sculpted that? But Fuda aside, this actually looks really good. And of course, she do got the booty, which I really can't hate on. That looks great. The blue in her suit is very metallic and reflective, and her vest actually looks almost like a faded green, which I think is a bit of a strange choice in colors, but I guess it works. She's crushing a can of MONTA, I believe it was called in the Showtime attack. That's a fun little reference. The scarf also really catches my eye when I'm first looking at her. That looks really good. I love the shape of that. And her face is very, very cute, very feminine. Her eyes are a bit big for me, but I don't know, I think it's really charming. Sculpt-wise, you really can't go wrong with this one. So let me put her on the base. And that's going to be done with some simple pegs and some holes that are both in her feet and the base itself. Be careful here though, because that reflective surface is prone to scratching, as we saw from just unboxing this thing. With no problems whatsoever, she plugs right into the base, and so far I think she looks really good. And I have to make a special note of the sculpting here, because the more I look at it, the more it really does stick out. There's a great amount of layering and physical adornments that I really like to see in my sculpts. One area in particular is definitely her vest here. All the lacing in the middle being actually physically etched on and so deeply recessed looks really, really good and really clean. But even something as simple as the wrinkles in her outfit, as well as the scarf, all look really well done. And at a distance, it really doesn't seem that problematic the way that her crotch was looking, so we'll see how it looks further with some better light on it. And when you're not up close and personal and really looking at it in the reflections, the scratches on the base aren't that big of a problem either. And before I forget, Makoto is about 9 inches tall, or roughly 23 centimeters. But starting at the bottom, of course, we have a lovely sculpted boot, as well as all of the little rivets and everything going up the sides of her leg look very clean and well painted for being such small details. The spikes on her knee, the indentations and different flaps of the clothing overlapping all look really well done. And from front to back, no details are skimmed on, everything being similarly well sculpted and colored in the back as well. Though in the back we found our first production error, being here at the lacy part of the back of her boot. Now, on the Hobby Japan figure, this was actually silver, but as you can see here, there is a strange amount of white residue. I'm not quite sure what that is inside of the bottom of where those laces meet. I can assure you that this is not how this is supposed to look, because the other leg does not have the same problem. I tried to see if wetting it might get rid of it, but no, that seems to be maybe dried up glue or something, so I might have to write an angry email. But let's go further up those legs, because of course, those long, slender things do lead up to a nice, chunky rear. And not for nothing, Makoto is packing some serious cheeks with this figure. A lot of times I say I won't be looking at the back, but damn, that is a spectacular booty. But that's of course one of the reasons we love Makoto. Still, booty aside, let's take a look at the way those legs look leading up into her waist. Really well shaped and just similarly greatly detailed. This might not be for everybody, but I do rather like the metallic blue finish on her suit, so I don't know, your mileage may vary. But further into the back, all the flaps of her clothing are similarly well detailed up here, and the muscles that just trace through her spine and shoulders all look really well sculpted. You really can't fault Megahouse on their sculpting because it is god tier. Like I said, her vest is a strange sort of dark green, which looks okay, but I would like for it to have been a bit more desaturated. But all the details around front are great too. That round shape of the shoulder just looks awesome. I don't really know what it is. Her hand is just barely missing her hip, which, I don't know, that might annoy some people, but still, it looks good. There's some decent wrinkling and sculpting here, which is fully recessed and painted in with some shading. There's a weird crease, almost like a seam, over her knuckles, which really breaks the immersion here. I could understand if maybe this was because there was swappable parts here, but you swap out her arms entirely for the other set. But let me talk about her face, because while I think it looks really good, I think there's just some small sense of it not looking entirely like Makoto. I know, I sound crazy every time I say this, but I don't know, the overall shape just feels a bit off. Maybe it's the eye size? Still, it does look really nice up close, and it actually fares better than the others. But her hair is pretty much perfect, though mine seem to have a scratch on the front of her bangs, which, again, is kind of making me mad. But the rest of the details regarding her hair are great. The bangs are a proper length, the sculpt and the choppiness of them is really clean in the front, which is perfect because of that sort of hime cut she has, but then in the back, it's chopped and fluffy. I think this is one of the best sculpts for her hair. Her braided hairband also looks really good here too. It's very clean and it's similarly well shaded, just like the rest of her head. From all angles, there's really nothing wrong with the way that her head looks. The hair being so full and choppy in the back is really, really nice. But what I really appreciate are these multiple layers in the back as well. The choppiness, while it doesn't need to be incredibly well shaded, because obviously you're not going to see all of it, is just a great touch to add some depth to this. And hey, if there's one thing I gotta give Megahouse, they actually got her eye color pretty much perfect. I'm trying not to let my lights bleach it out, but there's a subtle amount of blush in her cheeks, which of course adds that feminine charm that we love so much from Miss Niijima. Besides the production errors that I've seen, this is wonderful, so let's move onward to her swappable parts. Now, one thing I really like is the fact that on the box it lists that this is from Persona 5 The Royal. And technically that's true because Showtime attacks were not in the original Persona 5. So canonically, yes, I have a figure of Makoto from my favorite version of any Persona 5 game in the entire line. We're gonna have to be careful here, so firstly, let's grab the collar of her scarf and pull off her head. Now we can safely remove the scarf. Now with a careful amount of force, we are just going to pull her torso from her waist. And before we apply her second torso, we're just going to remove this plastic peg from where the neck is. Then just lower the new torso onto her waist. Now I would actually recommend that you plug her head into the scarf before lowering it onto the new torso. And then just plug that in. And as you can see, we've now swapped her can of soda for some really awesome looking knuckles. In all seriousness, the sculpt and the detail on these things are wonderful. And just like with the other hand, for some reason there's a seam going over her actual knuckles on her hand. I really don't get this. Even still, the sculpting on her fingers is really nice. The way that she's holding the one knuckle is really interesting. It actually looks a lot more cool in a simple closed fist to have her leading hand to be a bit more open. But a closed fist is fine too. But that isn't where it stops, because there's one last thing that we can swap out. This is going to feel very familiar because we're just going to pull the bangs off the front of her head. And with them off, you can actually see there's a subtle amount of shading from the top of her forehead where her bangs will actually be covering her skin. Kudos, that's a nice touch. But let's plug in the other set of bangs. And appropriately, her additional hairpiece just has her mask attached to it so that you can of course put her in her queen mask. Similarly nicely sculpted, painted well, and yeah, there's really no complaints there. And I was hoping that the alternate mask would have really made me like it a bit more, but the more I look at it, I think she looks better without. It really obscures any detail in her face. Obviously, her head being so small doesn't help that. Even having decent light on it really doesn't help the face to pop when it's covered by a silver shroud. And it's not like you're going to be very frequently underneath this thing to be able to see her mouth and eyes at the same time. You're likely going to be looking down onto it from a top angle, therefore obscuring her face entirely. And the more I look at this thing, the more I find flaws. On this alternate set of arms that have the knuckles, you can see on her elbow here a nice little dig in her paint. And that isn't small, that's a big chip in that finishing. Unfortunately, some of the detailing in the little spikes on her knees are also poorly painted. And I regret to inform you that it is not simply on one side. Okay, I could sit here and talk about this thing forever, but let's move into my final thoughts. I don't normally structure my videos this way, but we're going to go over the pros and cons because there's a lot to consider here. The first pro that we're going to look at is the sculpt. If I haven't made it clear by now, the sculpt is phenomenal. It's easily the best feature of this figure. Now with that said, there is obviously a peculiarity that does make this figure look a little strange. The pelvis makes no sense. I don't care how you try to spin it, what angle you're looking at, it doesn't make sense. And it's kind of gross. And I think why it's so weird is because there is an uncanny level of realism in the rest of her sculpt, to the point where it makes so much sense and she looks so feminine everywhere else that you can only look at this and go, what happened? But I'm not going to allow that to be the anchor which weighs this figure down. The sculpt is still great. Now the coloring is also really good. Now obviously I had some issue with the green in the vest, but that was mainly from the fact that I have multiple Makoto figures and not a single one has the slightest hue of green in the whole color palette. Again, that's not something that I'm going to use as a major sticking point. The painting on this is really good. There are some errors in the paint, but that's to be expected. I think overall, the colors and what they've done with the colors makes a lot of sense and looks really good. Most of the shading and highlights are wonderfully placed and they really do draw the eye. The blue of the suit being metallic feels so qualitative and it just looks amazing. This one looks so much louder and it pops so much better than the Amakuni figure on top of Johanna. And I like that quite a bit because these characters are meant to be very expressive, I guess. And how have I not said it yet, but the base, oh my god. I cannot tell you how overjoyed I was at a nice base. This is so infrequent that it's a big deal when we finally get a good one. So yeah, while there was some scratches on mine, it's not the end of the world and I still think what's there is great. You can't take away from what they actually made. And swappable parts. Who would have thought, but what a great way to make a scale figure fun. Never thought I'd say that. And yeah, I think that a lot of times swappable parts can be sort of divisive because they might not be worth your while, but I think that no matter what choice you make here, you'll ultimately be satisfied with the overall look. They're equally as viable as something that somebody might want to display her with. Personally, I like the knuckles, but some might like the soda. Also, I like her without the mask, but some may like her with the mask. And having the option is always nice, especially at this price. Now, this figure originally went for 13,800 yen, which right now is about $108, so that's a steal if you could get her for that, but I think she might be worth a little more now. And with all things considered, I'm going to give the Makoto Niijima Lucrea Megahouse figure an 8 out of 10. I was leaning towards a 7, but I really have to consider my feelings here, and I really like what I got. Again, there are problems. There are strange parts that don't make sense, and ultimately, that's going to be any figure. But I will say that for what's here, I wanted this to be a 10. It should be. The sculpting is masterwork. The painting is spectacular. There's an awesome base and there's swappable parts. There's so much about this that makes it a great figure and makes it worth buying. So it's really hard to not give it a perfect score. But still, I've got to be honest because this is Makoto. I'm holding her to a really high standard. But what do you guys think? Was I too harsh? Do you have any figures from Megahouse? What did you think of this one? Comment below and let me know. Like the video if you did indeed like it, or if you just thought this was a good review. You can also join my Discord where we talk about figures and anime and mostly just goof off. I've also got a Hobby Link Japan link where you can go buy figures for no extra cost and I get a small commission. It's Makoto May, so I'm going to link something on screen because there's an entire playlist of videos worshipping this goddess. So please make sure to click something on screen. So then while this was plenty of fun, me and Makoto are going to go do the 5-knuckle shuffle. But with that said, thank you so much for watching, have an amazing day, and keep on collecting.